I call this meeting to order. We are meeting in public. Welcome to continuation of meeting number 106 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. I would like to remind all participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Members, whether participating in person or by Zoom, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can. Thank you for your cooperation. I see Madam Jennifer O'Connell is replacing Madam Kaibaga. Welcome. And Mr. Dalton, you are becoming a regular member of this committee, replacing Mr. Maguire. Welcome. We are discussing sub-amendment of Mr. Kimich to the motion of Mr. Chang at the time of suspension on Monday, September the 16th. MP Kaibaga was the next person on the speaking list. Following were on the list to debate the sub-amendment after MP Kaibaga, MP Jahid, and then MP Kimich. And Mr. Dalton, you want to be on that list? Good. And now the floor is with Jennifer O'Connell, if you wish to speak. Otherwise, I'm going to go to Madam Jahid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but I'll pass my time as I'm just filling in and getting caught up, and you can move to the next speaker. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, we had the same thing we're doing in previous times, so I knew, in fact, she's going to go, but I just wanted to follow the chair's past deliberations. Yes.
So Ms. O'Connell, she was on the speakers list?
If Ms. Kaibaga was there, and if replacing person is there, that person will be on the list. And that has always been the practice on all sides. Okay? That's why I gave her the chance, even though I knew that she's going to pass it on to Madam Jahid, but I just wanted to follow the protocol.
Mr. Chair, that's the first time I've seen that practice. Can I ask the clerk if that's the common practice of committees?
This is the common practice in this committee, and I'm sure the other members will be fine with it, because you never know when we have to replace someone. There's always something going important. It's not one side, it's on all sides, and that is the protocol I was following, and that's what I will continue to unless I have a unanimous consent. Thank you. And Madam Jahid, mic is with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I ask for your patience as I have to raise a very important issue. As you will recall, in our last meeting, I had an exchange with Mr. Reddycop regarding my community of Scarborough. I'm a passionate defender of my community, as he is of his own community in Saskatoon. I've had the pleasure of visiting Saskatoon several times and meeting many local residents. Sometimes my passion gets the best of me, but I will certainly never apologize for being a champion of and for my community and its residents. Mr. Reddycop posted a video mocking our exchange that I felt was in poor taste, but that's certainly his choice. What I'm concerned about, Mr. Chair, is the racist, xenophobic, and Islamophobic commentary that his post has attracted and remains up on his Facebook page. I will share some examples with the committee. One commentator said, she should not be a member of parliament, neither should anyone else not born here to Canadian parents. Another, referring to former immigration minister Ahmed Hussein, replied in part, I have been saying it for years, since that Somalian was immigration minister. He's openly stated he's here to make money, send money to his homeland, and he will go back, I guess, when he's stolen enough money. Another commentator said she needs to be removed and banned. Another, it's concerning when our politicians
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order. If I may, Ms. Shahid, I'm sorry. Politicians are responsible for what they post. but responsibility for what people.
This is a debate. Mr. McLean, I would go
Thank
to
you.
Madam Jayad. Madam Jayad, please continue.
One said, massive deportation is now the only answer. And in blatant example of Islamophobia, referring to my hijab, one commentator on Mr. Reddy-Cobb's post said, "Who the pack is this thing with the tablecloth on?" Scarborough is a community that people from around the world have chosen to make their homes and build a better life for their families. Canadians from Bangladesh, from the Philippines, from Sri Lanka, from India, from Arab countries, and yes, from Pakistan, help make Scarborough a great place to live, and I'm proud to raise my family there. They would be very upset by the anti-Scarborough comments that Mr. Reddy-Cobb has attracted as well. Now, Mr. Chair, I'm sure these are comments that all my colleagues across the way, some of which I have enjoyed a productive and collegial working relationship with for several years, will want to distance themselves from. At least I certainly hope so. But we have seen too often that as we amp up our rhetoric, it can give unfortunate license to hatred, vitriol that is making it more dangerous for all elected officials. I hope we can be cognizant of that in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Jayad, and if you're done your spot, I will go to Mr. No problem, I'll wait. Mr. Comich, floor is yours.
So before I speak to the sub-amendment, I'm just going to say all of the comments that were racist, prejudiced, mean-hearted, evil, those aren't conservatives. I reject them wholeheartedly. I know my colleagues do as well. You know, I think we all find it really difficult to go through our comments and try to delete every single rude, obnoxious, racist, sexist, prejudiced comment that people make. And we're not all perfect. Can't always get it right. We are responsible for the comments that we make. And I hope people will find that I've always been judicious in the commentary I make, because, you know, like I joke, I'm a minority in my own family, because my kids are part Jewish, part Chinese. And so I'm very sensitive to like those types of aggressive commentary. And my partner is from Iran. So like I find it very, I see it even on her comments that she sometimes makes publicly, where people go and post nasty commentary as well. So we reject them wholeheartedly. They don't represent the Conservative Party of Canada. They don't represent the conservative movement either. That's easy to say. On the sub-amendment, though, that I moved at the last meeting, now we have a development, and a beautiful 12-word non-confidence motion is now available to the House to consider, that the House has lost confidence in this government, and I'd move so, and that we finally have that carbon tax election that this motion calls for now. If it passes with my sub-amendment, which I hope will find agreement from all parties that we do so, I really hope that we can get to the point we can pass this sub-amendment to have a carbon tax election. And in doing so, like, to prepare for this meeting, I did go and look up as many supporting documents as I could from different parliamentarians and legislators at the provincial level to try and persuade my colleagues that my sub-amendment is what the Canadian population wants, because we have 3 provincial elections coming up. And in all of them, the carbon tax will feature prominently as the main issue, or it'll be a carbon tax election. When you have Premier David Eby agreeing and now saying that basically he wants to abandon their own retail carbon tax in British Columbia, that's a carbon tax election. And I think it's incumbent upon us as parliamentarians to accept my sub-amendment that will go along with the main motion that will basically tell the House that we want a carbon tax election. Now, I know I've now heard that there's rumblings that perhaps this non-confidence motion that's being moved in the House will get support from one of the other opposition parties. That's regrettable. I hope they change their mind. They have many, many more days to be persuaded of that. But in the interim, we could approve my sub-amendment, and we could still report it back to the House. Mm-hmm. And as I've asked the clerks at the table, since I sit so close to them, it would be a novel way of inducing perhaps another non-confidence in the government through this report that we would table after the motion is passed. So some commentary from the BC Premier and NDP leader David Eby to scrap the carbon tax in British Columbia. This appeared in a Vancouver Sun on September 12th. I'm just going to quote him here. These are direct quotes. A lot of British Columbians are struggling with affordability. The political consensus we had in British Columbia has been badly damaged by the approach of the federal government. So if it decides to remove the legal backstop requiring us to have a consumer carbon tax in BC, we will end the consumer carbon tax in BC. Eby argued that large increases
order,
to
Chair.
the federal tax.
Point of order.
Mr. Chang.
Mr. Chair, I don't understand the relevance of Mr. Kamich's comment about carbon tax. It has no relevance to Bill C-71. That's the matter before us that we're debating. And what he's talking about is completely not connected to the matter before us.
Mr. Chang, Mr. Kamich has the floor. Mr. Kamich, please continue.
Thank you, Chair. So the relevance to my colleague across the way is my sub-amendment to the main motion is exactly on the carbon tax election, and I'm quoting back to him a seasoned politician on the NDP side who is saying that he's facing a carbon tax election in British Columbia, and that's what the public wants. So I'm trying to remind my colleague across the way through you, Chair, that we need a carbon tax election, and that's why I have a sub-amendment on this exact subject before this committee, so that we can have a carbon tax election and submit ourselves to accountability from voters, from Canadian citizens who will get to pick who will represent them in the 45th Parliament, in our next Parliament. And I'm more than happy to do that right away. My residents back home are enthusiastic about having a carbon tax election. And I'll go back to quoting now Premier Eby, who is less enthusiastic about facing the electorate in his home province because they're upset at the carbon tax, and they're specifically, more so I'd say, angry at the federal government for forcing British Columbia to keep a carbon tax because of the federal backstop legislation that forces every single province that doesn't have a carbon tax to have a price imposed directly upon them. So Premier Eby has clearly said that should there not be a federal backstop, they would abandon the British Columbia punishing carbon tax. And it's really convenient for him to say this so late in his term and so close to a provincial election day. And I think it's, of interest to the committee, especially, I think, to our chair, who happens to be from the beautiful province of British Columbia, through which I backpacked for 2 weeks over the summer with my kids. And that's why this is important. So this is the last quote I have from Premier Eby before I move to other provinces. So Eby argued that large increases to the federal tax, now $80 a ton as of April 1st is, to use another quotation, unsustainable. And that's what I heard at doors when I was door knocking in communities in North Vancouver, in Burnaby, in Delta, Vancouver Granville, Vancouver proper, not Surrey. Don't worry, Chair, I didn't make it out to Surrey to door knock, but I did door knock in Westminster, visited a lot of different groups as well. Door knocked also in Seymour, North Burnaby, a few spots, just to make sure that I heard directly from British Columbians, and what they were saying at the doors as well is many of them wanted just that, what this sub-amendment has, a carbon tax election. So moving on to my home province of Alberta, and it's an unusual day. I think my colleagues from Alberta always agree when we're quoting NDP MLAs, but I'm going to quote some NDP MLAs now. The Alberta NDP MLA and former leadership candidate Raki Pancholi spoke against the carbon tax, and this was reported earlier this year, before my sub-amendment even came to grace this committee to have a carbon tax election. On February 9th, 2024, reported in Calgary Herald, she said the following: "It may be time to move beyond a consumer carbon price and focus more on the things that do work," which again is an implication that carbon tax does not work and that we should abandon it. This is another quote: "I've been having many conversations with leading climate activists in our province, experts in this area, and we need to continue those conversations to say what would that climate plan look like without a consumer carbon price." Sounds to me like she was shying away from a retail carbon tax being imposed, which is exactly the point of my motion, of my amendment. The sub-amendment to the main motion is to have a carbon tax election. I think it's perfectly reasonable that we time this report back and its impact on C-71 legislation before it would come to this committee. I'll note that the government obviously finds no urgency in passing C-71 because it's not up for debate as far as I can tell today. It wasn't up for debate yesterday. I don't see it on notice for tomorrow's business. In fact, I don't think it's on the business for several more days. And the government saw no great urgency from the moment it tabled it in May to have it debated at any time in May or June before it came here. And I'll also remind members here that this committee was in public in a multi-meeting filibuster from the Liberal side. And I heard many people comment yesterday that the bad Conservatives were delaying C-71. There's no delay happening. Members are debating in the House the merits of the bill, the contents of the bill. And then I also heard the other side of the argument, which is Conservatives take too much time at committee to do their work. Like, I will continue to do the work the residents of Calgary Shepherd expect me to do, which is to represent them. And my residents in my riding, my sub-amendment is exactly what they want to see. The contents of it, every single word that's in my email inbox. They want to have a non-confidence vote. They want a carbon tax election, which is what my sub-amendment would deliver for them. Because I am going to go back this weekend. I'm going to go to my Veterans Walk in Glenmore Park. I'm going to go to the Church of Latter-day Saints for the Calgary food drive that they do for the whole city. And when I meet my residents, my constituents, my voters, they're going to ask me, what did you do for us this week? And I'm going to tell them, I moved at the committee that we report back to the House that we have a carbon tax election. And they'll be like, Tom, great. That's exactly what we sent you to Ottawa for. That's what we sent you to Parliament for. That's what we want. We're tired of the government. We want to see it replaced. We want to have a say. And that's what this would give them by being reported back. It places conditions on the main motion. That's exactly what my residents want to see. I have another quote I want to provide you from a different Alberta NDP MLA, one that I actually met at the Alberta legislature briefly when we were waiting in a line to greet the President of the Republic of Poland. So I got a chance to meet, I think, one of her kids. She got a chance to meet my kids and was just talking family issues. So I'm going to be quoting here Alberta NDP MLA and leadership candidate Sarah Hoffman, who spoke out against the carbon tax. This is CTV Edmonton, February 11th, 2024. I think the consumer carbon tax is dead. So we need to find new tools that are successful. Nobody's on board with the Prime Minister, with what the Prime Minister did with the federal carbon tax. He absolutely broke trust and broke confidence when he looked at the polls in Eastern Canada and decided to exempt them. This third quote, there's no way people can be on board with a federal plan when even the Prime Minister isn't on board, when he's playing games with it. So even the Alberta NDP agrees, I think, with my sub-amendment. Like the purpose is, let's have a carbon tax election federally. Let's get this resolved. Let the voting public pick. They can make a decision. I believe in the wisdom of crowds. I believe that voters always have the best say. They get to choose who represents them. I hope they will. I hope that I can continue to earn their trust, like we all hope we can continue to earn their trust and continue to represent them in our national parliament. It is a great privilege to do so. And I think that's exactly what Sarah Hoffman here was speaking to. She was speaking to the fact that the Prime Minister had even abandoned the federal carbon tax. Premier Eby had talked about the fact that if there had been a backstop in law, he would have abandoned it as well. And that's what this sub-amendment proposes to do, is to just move it up to the House and have the House confirm the committee's report to say not before a carbon tax election happens, because that's what the public wants to see. And I think it's critically important. And with that, Chair, I'm going to stop my comments here. I have more comments. I want to note a letter from the Public School Boards Association of Alberta that represents all the public school boards who wrote to me and other Conservative members of Parliament specifically about the impact of the carbon tax on schools in my home province. But I'll leave it at that, Chair, and I'll cede the floor.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dalton, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the committee for the opportunity to be able to speak to MP Chang's C-71 motion, but more specifically to the sub-amendment by Conservative Member Parliament, Tom Kimmich, which says that after temporary foreign workers, the following words, quote, and after carbon tax election is held, so that Canadians and Quebecois can vote out this tired and out-of-touch NDP coalition government. That is the sub-amendment, and it has been ruled in order several times by the chair, and he did need to admonish different members for being disruptive, and I'm glad to see there was no disruption to Mr. MP Kimich's comments, and so I'm looking forward to be able to get through my comments here. So my remarks will focus on the carbon tax and how the out of touch the Liberals, and I would add the NDP and Bloc, are with Canadians from coast to coast, and why we do need a carbon tax election. I represent Maple Ridge Pitt Meadows, and that is a suburb of the Greater Vancouver, on the north side of the MP Dollawall's riding, here to the south in Surrey, and so it's a beautiful area, but so that's my perspective. Will be as an MP, for British Columbian MP, though comments I share are in line with how Canadians feel across this country. I've never seen residents in my riding so stressed out as they are now. And I've been an MP since 2019, but prior to that, I was an MLA for 8 years, representing the same region. And I'm talking about people that, with cost of living, seniors living on fixed incomes, single parents, couples with and without children, new immigrants, students. They are feeling very stretched. I talked to one worker recently, and he told me that he's working from 10 in the morning till 10 at night, 7 days a week, and he says he can't give his body a break. He's exhausted, but if he does that, he's going to lose his home. And this is being felt, these are comments that I'm hearing throughout British Columbia and in my riding. People are maxing out on their line of credit card debt, feeling anxious and frustrated. And I'm sure that the members here of this committee this is in sync with what they may be hearing. Also, consumer debt continues to rise, and it's especially impacting those that are new to the country and Generation Z, but it's being felt across the board. There's $2.5 trillion, according to August 27th, 27th report, Market Pulse Consumer Credit Trends, and Insights report from Equifax. $2.5 million in consumer debt. It's increased in the past year by 4.5%, which is very significant. So millions and millions of Canadians are tapped out and struggling to make ends meet. And they're going deeper into debt, which means higher and higher interest payments. And that is, which only puts on more pressure, because the same expenses that they had to pay for, whether it be food, gas, shelter, I mean, those costs are not just staying the same, but they are increasing. And so it's what we call a debt trap. And it is a terrible, it's a very difficult place for people to be in. And in the Lower Mainland, Greater Vancouver area, housing costs are $1 million plus as far as owning a home and having mortgages. People are having mortgages of $600,000, and the just the increase in payments. And I want to just step back here for a second here when I'm talking, because I know I'm mentioning some other different costs of living, but it all relates to the the real challenge, the burden that Canadians are feeling, and the carbon tax, which I'll get into more, really highlights and is an unnecessary cost that is being added to Canadians. So with the increase in mortgage rates, it is making it tough for residents to pay for kids to clothe them with new clothes, or to pay for their sports, or just to put food on the table. And it's not just people that own the houses, it's people that are renting. I have someone that is very dear to me that just rented an older one-bedroom apartment, and it costs her $2,800 before utilities. $2,800. I mean, you pretty much almost need $100,000, which, or $80,000, $100,000 just to be able to make ends meet nowadays. It is so hard, and that is one of the reasons why so many people are new residents, students, others are cramming into apartments and other places just to kind of try and share the cost of living, sleeping on couches, sharing bedrooms. It's really hard. And, you know, as a government, as legislators, that's not the direction that we want to see our nation go. We want to see things getting better. I know that's the feeling that, you know, all the members here at this committee and all the representatives, you know, we do want to see. We don't want to see things getting worse for people. We don't want to be adding to the misery index. We want to see things getting better. I know we share that, but the thing is, there's policies that are doing the exact opposite, and it's like it's just time to wake up. And the government just seems to be like a train going off a bridge that has been blowing up and going right off the edge. It's just like they're not changing. They're not changing. Matter of fact, they are changing. They're just making things more expensive. They're saying, okay, well, we'll just spend hundreds of millions more dollars here and billions of dollars here. We're throwing money around willy-nilly and no real consideration of the finances, their policies, what it's doing to impact everyday Canadians. So in British Columbia, we pay the highest gas prices in Canada, in North America. Right now, it's $1.75 a liter, and it's been, I think last summer it was up to $2.50 a liter. But it's expensive. And the carbon tax is a significant portion of this price. I believe earlier before summer, we put a motion forward, Conservatives put a motion forward that the government, the Liberals, backed by the NDP and the Bloc, that they would not put the GST, remove the GST from the carbon tax. So we have the carbon tax, and then there's a GST which only elevates the price on gas, but that was defeated. And so now people can say, well, just take public transportation. Well, I suppose that's possible in downtown city core, Vancouver, maybe Toronto, Montreal, but for those living in the suburbs, those living in rural communities all over, it's not as simple as that. The transportation, quite often, the bus systems don't operate throughout the night, and a lot of times it's not direct. You might have to, the lines go, it take a lot longer to be able to get to your work, which only puts more stress on a person's life and less time at home. So, it's important to have a good public transportation system, but in Meadows Maple Ridge, we have a bus system, and we have a West Coast Express that goes one direction in, I think, 5 trains in the morning one way and 5 trains coming back from the downtown core. And this just doesn't do it. People need to get their kids to sports, or they need to go shopping, and so you can't just. They need to use their vehicles. It seems like the government is just trying to get people out of their cars, make them walk, take us back to the Middle Ages, Dark Ages, and BC used to be a net exporter on electricity, so that has been seemed the direction of the Liberals and NDP and the Bloc is, well, just use more electricity. Just use, well, the fact of the matter is that British Columbia used to be exporter, now we're importing electricity. And so the saying, well, we need to have more and more EV vehicles, and that's a good option for many people, but it doesn't work when you consider all the demands on our electricity grids. It's very challenging. So it is kind of, I think, how can I say politely, foolish to say, well, no more. Polite. That's very polite. I was being very polite. Yes. Very foolish to say.
Please, one person have the floor, and because we got to make sure that we take good care of our interpreters' health, and that's very key. So, Mr. Dalton, you have the floor.
So, yeah. I was saying, okay, it was a good point. I lost, but maybe that was objective here to make me lose the point of train of thought. Yes, start. But the Liberals and the coalition partners have said that they want to basically ban vehicles using fuels by, I believe it's 2035, if I'm not mistaken. Like it's just so impractical. Not just impractical, it's impossible. And dealers, and I don't mean car dealers, are finding it really hard to sell their EV vehicles. Because why is that? Okay, price is one thing, even though the price has gone down. Even though there's been lots of subsidies, because it doesn't work for many people. As far as the charging, as far as the be able to travel to different places in the province, in the country. Doesn't work for everybody. So it's just crazy. Really, a lot of the policies are just crazy. Like, who is running the country? I mean, we know who's running the country, but do they actually consider the implications of what they're doing upon people? Do they want people to have jobs? Do they want people to be able to move, to be able to have vehicles? It just seems like, honestly, it seems that the Liberal government, is trying to bring us back down, bring us to, destroy our nation. And that's what they're doing. It's not they're trying. They're actually they are doing a fine job in tearing down our nation. Let's just talk about per capita income. About, I think it was 2017, 2016, per capita income in Canada was about $55,000. And what is it right now? 9 years later, it is $54,000, approximately $54,000. Like, we've gone down. When Prime Minister Harper was in power, and the Conservatives, Canada, our per capita income was about the same as the U.S. Americans. Our dollar was strong, and but that has been whittled away. It has been whittled away by incompetence. And that's shame. I say shame. And people are feeling this, crying out. Look at food banks in Canada. There's millions of Canadians that are lined up at the food banks everywhere. I've visited food banks in Vancouver, and they're telling me that use has gone up 2-3 times percent, or it's doubled, tripled. In my community also, we have a great food bank, provides tremendous service. Friends in Need Food Bank, I'll be helping out with the food drive this coming Saturday. And people are generous in our community, but they're saying they don't have the goods to give like they used to, because the demand is so much. And let's talk about Toronto. 1 out of 10 of the 10% of the population relies on food banks. Like, look, Toronto has got 6.5, 7 million people. Like, people are suffering out there. Like, it's sad. Sorry. There's so we had a by-election, in St. Paul's, Toronto St. Paul's. And, it's been a stronghold for the Liberals. And I know the by-elections, quite often they're challenging for government power. We recognize that, okay? But nevertheless, we won, the Conservatives won that strong seat. And we had a by-election a couple days ago in Winnipeg. Liberals gained less than 5% of the popular vote. Montreal, they lost a seat, which was a former stronghold by Prime Minister Paul Martin. It's been held by him, and so it is. It's just. They've lost their way. Well, this is not a new thing, but they're out of touch as far as the government, unfortunately. And I know as far as the members as individuals, I know different ones right there, and I like you as people, okay, and enjoy having conversations across, whether it be, I don't care whether it's the Bloc or the NDP as far, I appreciate, and I do, we're people, we're all human, but nevertheless, we have political philosophies that I attack, and I don't mean it personal, but it is something that is affecting Canadians personally. And so the previous Liberal president in my riding told me that the Liberals had just lost their way. That he was going to donate to my campaign. He was a Liberal, former Liberal president. And if that isn't enough, the Liberal candidate that I ran against last election, he told me, he says, "Mark, I'm going to vote for you this election." I mean, that's not something I'd want to hear if I was a Liberal. I mean, it's honestly, the alarm bells are ringing. I mean, you know that, and you see the polls. It's obviously as far as the Liberals go here. But I think that this is a message too for the Bloc Québécois and the NDP that you've hitched your carriage to this horse or whatever. I don't know how the illustration goes, but you're hitched to this by voting with them. And I can see why they're getting pretty squirmy as far as trying to pull out. It kind of baffles me a bit, and I'll mention this in some other comments about the Bloc now saying they're going to...
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président. Là, on est...
Point of order, Mr. Chair. We are on a very thin line because we're talking about an amendment on a motion about the carbon tax, but we're hearing partisan attacks that we are used to hearing in the chamber. So I would ask my colleagues to stick to the carbon tax and not attack people in a partisan manner. Or if you want to let them continue, Mr. Chair, then this committee will turn into something else, and we won't be able to represent people who have confided in you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bruno Giuseppe.
Okay.
Mr. Dalton, you have the floor.
Oui, mais j'aimerais dire aussi que...
But but I would like to add that the amendment says that it's not just a discussion about the carbon tax, it's also about how the government is out of touch with Canadians. That is why my comments are in order.
So so we're talking about being out of touch, and we're talking about coalitions. So the NDP tied in with the Liberals, the common working man. I visited union shops with the leader and the Conservative leader and other places, work sites throughout British Columbia primarily. And they're expressing their frustration. They're coming to about the cost of living, about the carbon tax. They're telling me how hard it is. You know, a lot of them are, they have trucks and they go. Some of them own firearms. Some of them, they need it for work, and they're feeling the pinch. And my riding is traditionally has been more blue collar, but it is now it's quite mixed. But they've had it. They've had it. The working man, the working woman, as far as on the states, the tradespeople, was up on Vancouver Island not that long ago, speaking to a group of people, and one of the gentlemen came up to me and introduced himself, and he was actually a former NDP cabinet minister, and he told me that he said that actually he's joined the Conservative board. Here he is, a former NDP cabinet minister on a Conservative riding association, because he says the NDP Liberal coalition, he's told me that they've totally lost their way. He says they've gone woke, they're not in contact, they're not in connected, they don't understand the working person. I mean, so the Conservative, look at the maps, please. Look at the 338. Obviously that is just it's just a survey picture of where things are right now. It doesn't, it's not for certain that's what the election's going to be, but just look at where things are at. People are frustrated. You get the message? The NDP and the Liberals are in the province of BC are, if the polling is correct, would show a massive loss of seats there. So, I'm not in charge of obviously, you have each party has their own strategist right there, but it would seem to me that the strategy is, it better be, looking at things. So it was mentioned by Mr. MP Kimmich that they are looking at the polls. The NDP, for example, the premiers are looking at how people feel about the carbon tax. 70% of Canadians don't want it, okay? And so up until a week or so ago, NDP Premier David Eby was touting the carbon tax. I believe last March, the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, sent a letter to him and to join 7 other premiers at that time to oppose the carbon tax increase on April the 1st. And what was his response? This is the CTV News headline. It says, "Baloney Factory. Eby mocks Poilievre letter asking BC to join carbon fight." A letter from the opposition Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre to British Columbia's David Eby asking him to help halt a federal carbon price increase was dismissed by Eby as baloney factory campaign tactics. Poilievre's letter said that 23% increase amounts to an extra 18 cents a liter of fuel on a liter of fuel on people across BC, and Canadians cannot afford it. The carbon pricing system set up by Trudeau is an imposition on Canada provinces that requires them to accept an ever-increasing levy. And then EB's responded, I don't live in Pierre Poilievre's campaign office and baloney factory. I live in BC. I'm the premier, and decisions have consequences. So fast forward to a week ago. What did he say? He said that he will remove the carbon tax if federal government removes the requirement. And he here's the quote. The context and he says this is Premier Eby. The context and the challenges for British Columbians has changed. A lot of British Columbians are struggling with affordability. Well, this didn't happen just in the past 4 months. This has been going on for quite some time. Very interesting choice of words. He says the context has changed. And what happens to be the context? The context is he's in the midst of an election that the NDP thought they were walking away with, having a massive majority, but the BC Conservatives are now breathing down their necks, and the Main Street poll showed them ahead, 46% to 44%. There's other polls that show them behind, one party ahead, one behind. But basically, they're panicking in the NDP war room. And so it's so that's why they're throwing out the carbon tax. Okay, well, whatever we got to do, this is panic. But people can see through it. And I know that Jagmeet Singh with the NDP has said now we're going to reconsider the carbon tax. Well, that's good. Well, let's reconsider. Let's go to an election. And je veux dire aussi au Bloc.
I would like to also speak to the Bloc Québécois and say that it is not just a tax that impacts the rest of Canada and it doesn't impact Quebec. I'm looking for the right word. But, thank you, by the way. So the per capita impact will remain the same. So the carbon tax does have an impact, and it is making life harder for Quebecers, as it is having the same impact in the rest of Canada. I mean, our strategy as Conservatives is out there for all to see. We will put the blame on the Bloc Québécois because they are going to support this party that will remain in charge. And the Liberal Party is the costliest political party or the government of the history of Canada, and the most centralizing government we have ever seen. And in my opinion, that is quite contrary to the Bloc's ambitions, because they are giving away money and control to the federal government. So they are now blocking this from proceeding forward. So it's costly to vote Bloc. So I'd like to thank you all and have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Floor is going to Mr. El-Khoury. I'm going to say the list first, and then I'll give you the floor, Mr. El-Khoury. So on the list, I have Mr. El-Khoury, MP Kwan, MP McLean, MP Radikop, and Mr. Kmich. In that order. So, no, you're not here. Okay, so first I have Mr. El-Khoury, then I will go to Madam Kwan, then I will come to you, Mr. McLean, and then Mr. Radikop and Mr. Kmich. Those are the speaking list. Okay, Mr. El-Khoury, yours. Floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would love to see my colleague, Mr. Dalton, listen what I am going to say and how he contradicts himself at 200%. But I believe he preferred to run away. Come back. Mr. Chair, I'm really puzzled. Et je suis vraiment déçu de voir.
And I'm really disappointed to see that our colleagues from the Conservative Party are trying to bring this government down and they're not really thinking about the interests of Canadians.
We see that Canadians need to improve their life after the global economic difficulty from the COVID to now. When we see the interest rate dropped 2 times and it will continue to be dropped, and that will alleviate the life of Canadians. They are looking just for their own interest, and they did not take into consideration if the people of Canada would like to have an election in this difficult time. And I believe if you go from coast to coast, majority of Canadians, they don't want to have election now. They would like all of parties in the House working to make the life Canadian a better life. Let me go point by point. My respected colleague, Mr. Kimmich, was talking about receiving a letter from school boards asking for the removing of carbon tax. I would like to ask him, and he said that will help students go to school. When this government, Mr. Chair, proposed a bill in order to bring a free meal to students, in order to have a $10 daycare for every child, they voted against. If the interest of the schools, of the parents, of the students, they should have voted yes. When it comes to improving the life of Canadians, when we present the dental care, if they care about Canadians, they should have voted yes. They did the opposite, Mr. Chair. When we talk about environment, if we talk about environment, we have to prepare this country for generation, for our children, grandchildren, to have a clean air, to have a clean drinking water, to have a green economy, to have a green infrastructure. And every single bill, Mr. Chair, they voted against. What they do, they do and they declare something, and they precisely do the opposite. Regarding my good friend, Mr. Dalton, I hope he is here. And if you go to his portfolio when he was in the government of British Columbia legislature, and I quote here, he said in 2017, and I would like his colleague to listen properly and to understand what he said. Our government made the decision to implement a tax on carbon. Our carbon tax appears to be working. That's exactly what he said, Mr. Chair. Independent study have found that between 2008 and 2012, fuel use in British Columbia dropped by 16% per capita. In 2015, a review of 7 independent studies suggested that British Columbia's carbon tax has reduced emissions in the province by up to 15%, Mr. Chair, by up to 15%. We view this tax as a tool to change behavior and reduce greenhouse gas emission, and said, Mark Dalton, British Columbia Legislature, February 27, 2017. I hope he would listen to this and he will give an answer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Khoury. I will go to Madam Kwan. Madam Kwan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll be very brief about this. Really, all of this is just a ploy, in my view, playing politics at its worst. And what we're seeing here in relation to Bill C-71 is an attempt from the Conservatives once again to actually kill the bill. And I suppose I should not be that surprised because, after all, it was them who brought in Bill C-71 that stripped the rights of Canadians and then deemed them as second-class citizens. And irrespective of the fact that the Superior Court in Ontario has found this to be unconstitutional, the Conservatives still wants to persist. I know they'll make arguments and say things like, oh, when Bill C-37 was passed, all the parties in the House supported it. Well, let us just be clear on the record. In fact, Don Chapman, who is absolutely an expert about the history of Lost Canadians, in his book, he actually noted that the Conservative government, Harper at the time, made it clear that if that bill was not supported unanimously, unchanged by the parties, that he was stripped all the other elements that would have impacted veterans, war brides. They would have gone to their graves without having their citizenship recognized. And so what did the parties do? They held their nose and did what they had to do in order to honor the veterans and the war brides. And the legislation, Bill C-37, that was founded on violation, in my view, based on sex discrimination. And Mr. Speaker, I should also add that the NDP, Olivia Chow, who was the critic at that time, because I wasn't around the House at the time, she attempted to raise the concerns around the provisions that stripped second-generation born Canadians of their right to citizenship and did, in fact, call for that section to be struck or amended. But of course, that didn't happen because if she ultimately went down that track to do anything, it would have meant that the war veterans and the war brides and others, there were some elements that was good in Bill C-37, would have been lost altogether. Right, Greg? That would have meant that all that would have been lost, and war veterans who fought for this country would have gone to their graves without having been recognized as Canadians. And that is shameful. The gender discrimination for the war brides is shameful. That's what happened on Bill C-37. 15 years later, we're trying to fix all of this. And again and again and again, the Conservatives want to play games with people's lives and their suffering. Those who have children who are born stateless is the result of the Conservatives' bill. Families separated is the result of the Conservatives' bill. To the point where enough was enough, courageous people took this to court and won. And even then, the Conservatives say, oh, well, let's put our politics ahead of everybody else and call for an election. And what that would mean is that Bill C-71 would die on the order paper. That means the violation in constitutional rights will continue to be violated for these lost Canadians. And Mr. Speaker, I would add this. Oh, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. Mr. Chair, the Conservatives claim that they support family members of lost Canadians. And wouldn't you know it, the leader of the official opposition, in a correspondence in response to lost Canadian families, said that they would actually see Bills S-245, which is the Senate bill, go to third reading. Well, how did that go? Not only did they filibuster the bill in this House or in this committee for 30 hours, and not only did we finally get all that passed and was reported to the House, the sponsor of the bill, Jas Halan, moved in the order of precedence for S-245 as amended to come up to the House for third reading debate and a vote 8 times. 8 times. I think that must be a record to preempt it from actually getting voted on and passed in the House. That is the reality, folks. So they can say all they want and all those speeches that they just made so that they can put on social media, so that they can say to the leader, we did our job. And by the way, that amendment, Mr. Speaker, to my understanding, they're using it for every committee. It is absolutely a political stunt is what they're trying to do. I project that they're using that for every committee because I think that's the tactics that they want to engage in, Mr. Speaker. Correct. That's what we see with those kinds of tactics is a repeat. You know, throw it in, rinse, recycle, start all over again. Those are the kind of tactics that we've seen over and over again, and that's my projection, that that is the kind of thing that they would do with the other committees as well. So always putting ahead their partisan politics, ahead of the needs of the community, ahead of the needs of Canadians. That's what we're seeing right here, right now, today.
Thank you, Madam Kwan. We will go to Mr. McLean, MP McLean. Please go ahead. Floor is with you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pardon me, Mr. Chair, but I also would like to promote you, Mr. Chair. I think you do a great job. There were some remonstrations that I've heard here about something that happened 15 years ago and how parties in this House, and not just the NDP that just spoke, but the Liberals have tried this as well. We voted for that legislation under Stephen Harper, but it's all his fault because he told us we had to. I mean, come on. I'm a parliamentarian with a spine, and if you were in this House at that point in time and somebody said, don't do your job, just do what we say, I would say that you're not doing your job as a parliamentarian. So I can't speak directly to what happened 15 years ago because I wasn't here. But I will say that making excuses for your own behavior and the own decisions that you've had to make, every decision that we make in this Parliament requires considering both sides, the pros and the cons of what we're trying to accomplish in that. And if you try and undo half of that post facto, you are pretending that there was never a pro and a con to the argument. Moving things quickly as far as getting more Canadians their citizenship that they're due was a job we all have to undertake here. We'd like to undertake that with a bill that would be brought forth here as well, and making sure that we have a robust immigration system. But we're talking about this sub-amendment right now, which is about including in the tactic brought forward by my colleague from the NDP to try and bypass Parliament and bring this bill directly to this committee for expedited delivery as opposed to having people actually address it at second reading in the House of Commons. Now, I find that to be an affront to Parliament. It's never been done before, and frankly shouldn't be done. We have a process in Parliament that we actually use to debate bills, particularly bills that are going to have significant consequences to Canada's immigration system. So the stunt being pulled by this motion, of which we have an amendment and a sub-amendment to at this point in time, is entirely at the feet of the New Democratic Party. Thank you very much for trying to manipulate Parliament in this Parliament, not 15 years ago, today. So I am also accountable to making sure that I stand up to nonsense, and this motion here is nonsense and goes against the democratic principles we stood for in this country and we abide by, and we try and make sure that the Liberal NDP coalition doesn't continue to try and whittle away as we try and uphold democracy across this country. And this motion, and pardon me, this sub-amendment to the amendment to the motion that my colleague has brought forward is the #1 issue on the minds of Canadians across Canada right now. If you want to talk about listening to constituents and listening to what Canadians are saying is the most important issue right now in Canada, it is the fact that they have lost faith in this government's words about the carbon tax. And that's because, I'm going to say this very clearly here, Mr. Chair, it's because members of the government, members on the other side here, but they're not really responsible because I know they're just reading off their pages, but the government itself, the Prime Minister, each of his ministers stand up in the House of Commons and address Canadians and say nonsense like this bill puts more money in your pocket than it takes out. We just take that money out of your pocket, take it into Ottawa, give it to our bureaucrats to shuffle around, and then we kind of add a little bit of salt and pepper to it and put it back in your pocket. That's garbage. And the parliamentary budget officer has said that's garbage, and yet the Prime Minister and his band of merry men and women continue on that complete false narrative. Let's call it what it is. It's been called many things, Mr. Chair, but let's call it what it is. It's dishonest. There is no government money that doesn't come from the taxpayers. Not 1 cent are you putting in the pockets of Canadians that didn't come from the pockets of Canadians. Public finance is public finance. And drifting into a $50 billion deficit for no reason other than the fact that you want to continue to grease your friends is no way to run a democratic government in Canada. And I think that we need to continue to hold this government to account. I heard someone say here in addressing the sub-amendment that Conservatives spend too much time at committee examining legislation. What do you think our job is? And I'll tell you, I've only been at this committee 1 year, but I have yet to examine legislation at this committee because it's been filibustered so much by the Liberals in not bringing forward legislation, both in camera and in public.
Mr. McLean, anything in camera we cannot mention here. Please be careful. Thank you.
Thank you. Much time has been taken addressing almost nothing, both in public meetings and in non-public meetings. I hope that was better said, Mr. Chair. And that is a shame that this committee has accomplished almost nothing in the 12 months I've been on this committee. It is, when I share that with Canadians, and I hope to share that with Canadians, they're going to wonder, why are we paying these people to come to Ottawa and sit in meetings where they get nothing done? So let me challenge my colleagues across the table here and my colleagues down the table that we need to start getting things accomplished here. And those accomplishments need to include getting the right sub-amendment that we're talking about here. Let me give a quick indication of what happens at committees. So I was previously on the, and it's illustrative here, I hope you don't mind, Mr. Chair. I was previously on the Environment Committee, and here's what happened on the Environment Committee when we're addressing changes to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. The thing about Canadian environmental protection is it requires melding the science of environmental protection with the language, the legal language of making sure that that scientific reality is put into legislation. It is an art and a science built into one. We took time to do that, and there was protestations from the Liberal side of the bench that you're just taking too much time, and in the end we made some significantly good amendments with the help of a couple good Liberal backbenchers who actually respected things like science and respected things like parliamentary jurisdiction and where we were overlapping with the jurisdictions of provinces. And we got a better piece of legislation with some significant scientific and legal input from wonderful public officials that provided us advice on that committee. And what was the end result? The amended bill went to Parliament at report stage. And all the changes that we'd labored through in that committee, extensive, positive, constructive, scientific and legalistic changes, were undone in an instant because the Liberals were put over, I'll call it blackmail by the NDP, said either undo all the amendments or else we will not vote for your legislation. And the Minister of the Environment, one Stephen Guilbeault, acquiesced. And acquiesced as he shouldn't have done because we have a parliamentary process here. This is how good input from several parliamentarians and the good work of several public officials was completely wasted. So nobody can tell me with a straight face and not sound like a hypocrite that we spend too much time doing the work we're supposed to do at committee, because it hasn't been what I've seen being done at this committee for the last 12 months. I also heard one of my colleagues talk about Mr. Dalton's comments when he was a previously elected provincial legislator and about the provincial carbon tax in British Columbia. And the numbers are off, but I will say we have looked at what the actual reductions at the time were in British Columbia that coincided with the introduction of the carbon tax that was imposed in British Columbia. And they almost exactly coincided with the reduction of economic activity. So I'll put that on Mr. El-Khoury's desk, if you can take a look at that and educate himself that if you're going to have less economic activity, of course you're going to have less carbon emissions. So if his suggestion is in Canada that we just stop economic activity in order to reduce our carbon footprint, well, we're going to have a lot more people on the street, a lot more people doing nothing, and sooner or later a lot less public officials and a lot less parliamentarians, because there's nothing to sustain the economy if the economy isn't working. So Mr. El-Khoury, please take a look at that, because it isn't necessarily as direct as what you're saying. In any event, you have now the Premier, the NDP Premier of British Columbia, admitting that it doesn't work and saying if the federal backstop legislation wasn't there, he would walk away from it. So I don't know what exactly you need to hear from the people that it's impacting the most. Canadian citizens have said very clear. British Columbian citizens have said very clear. And everybody that actually looks at the carbon tax and its ineffectiveness at reducing emissions has said so. It is a cost without a benefit. I'll go into it further later here as far as an education on what a carbon tax was supposed to do and what it doesn't do. And the science is clear, and the economics are also clear. And we can go into that in great detail, and I'll debate anybody in this House of Commons on those matters. But what this really is about, and why we want to get towards making sure that we get a carbon tax election, because we do want a carbon tax election. The reason this has gained some significant tailwinds from all the Canadians across this country, is because they know now they've been misled by this parliament. And that's a parliament run by the leadership of the party that's facing me right now, the Liberals, with the acquiescence of the NDP and sometimes of the Bloc Québécois. So we have to make sure that we actually put it on trial here, and that trial will be when the Canadian people actually decide that they get to pass judgment on the government that has misled them beyond measure for several years now on what they're trying to accomplish. And the question is, of course, if you keep jacking up this tax and keep increasing inflation, why aren't the emissions going down in the world? Why is carbon still going up? Why is carbon increasingly going up from people we should be helping reduce carbon? It's because, I'm going to say this very clearly, Mr. Chair, this government doesn't know what it's doing. It thinks that taking money out of people's pockets is the way to accomplish something, but really what it's accomplishing is taking money out of people's pockets and giving it to their friends. It's a wealth transfer and nothing but. But this is, like I say, Canadians now are wise to it. And I think they got wise very clearly. And if I can think of a crystallizing event on it, it was when Goody Hutchings, the Minister of Rural Development, the Liberal Minister of Rural Development, was very clear about why Eastern Canadians got a break on their carbon tax for home heating oil, which has a much higher carbon footprint than natural gas, got a break on that because it was affecting them. And it was the question of how come Eastern Canadians get that break, but Western Canadians and other Canadians don't. She goes, well, maybe Western Canadians should elect more Liberals, then we do something about it. That is the height of cynicism. And frankly, I think most Canadians thought it was grounds for her to be fired as a cabinet minister. That partisan an approach to how we actually take taxes from certain people in certain parts of Canada and give carbon breaks to people in other parts of Canada is not the way a country holds itself together. This government has been excessively good at divide and conquer. Where's our votes? How do we transfer wealth from people that might not vote for us to people that we can put money in their pockets to vote for us? Is not a strategy that holds together at the end of the day, because as Margaret Thatcher once said, sooner or later, when the economy goes downhill, you run out of other people's money to take away and give to your friends. And that is not the way to run this country. It hasn't been the way it's been run in a proper government, and it shouldn't be run that way now. Let's talk about a consumer carbon tax, because that's what we're talking about here, a consumer carbon tax. There are a few carbon taxes that have been put on the plate by this government. There's not just the carbon tax that's there for people to see. There's, in effect, the clean fuels regulation, which is an additional carbon tax that's put on top of the other tax. So it's almost double at the end of the day, because in the end, the consumer pays for everything. But it's another tax that's built into energy that goes into producing everything in our economy. And then there's the regulatory overburden that happens. They're trying to push forward with a clean electricity standard. If you take a look at the $40 billion plus that's been reported for batteries in Canada, the government of Quebec put out their number and talked about the cost per ton of CO2 reduced by batteries. It's over $800 per ton, 10 times higher than the consumer carbon tax. This is subsidization, regulation, money being poured, taxpayers' money is being poured out of governments. The Minister of Industry, Francois-Philippe Champagne, his moniker in many parts of Canada now is the Minister of Writing Checks. And the whole notion, of course, is that if there's going to be checks being written, you may as well have your hand out. And it is now just a handout. We're $50 billion deficit across this country with no end in sight for this government's spendy ways. It's something that has to turn itself around here in a hurry. And batteries, of course, are the worst example of that, about how exactly we're actually feeling this right now in Canada. Most people don't know this, but I'll tell my colleagues this, and I know that the only Albertans on this committee are on this side of in this party. And I look at the Liberals and the NDP and the Bloc, and most of them won't realize that the first jurisdiction in Canada to have a carbon tax was Alberta. And it's Alberta that had the industrial carbon tax, and it's been there for 20 years now. And it was a very good tax, and it has evolved. So I was a critic of the tax in its early stages because it was a rewarding activity that was not reducing emissions. Reducing emissions is what we have to do. But like all these systems, they evolve. And the 20-year evolution of the industrial carbon tax in Alberta was something that there was a lot of trial, learnings, and the robustness of a system that's the envy of the rest of Canada, that this government of Canada would like to emulate, if it could, although it doesn't like to emulate things from Alberta, it seems, would like to emulate as far as its own output-based pricing system, an industrial carbon tax, if you will. And yet it doesn't know how to do that because it doesn't have any expertise, whereas the provincial government in Alberta actually does have expertise in this matter. So when you have siloed expertise in Canada, take the lessons from the people that know what they're doing. That's step one. Find out who knows what they're doing in this process and follow their lead. So follow the government of Alberta as far as what they're doing on carbon reduction efforts. And I want to bring to my colleagues' attention here, those efforts have led to the reduction in carbon per barrel produced in Alberta by about 34% over 20 years. So think about that. We produce energy, and the energy we produce at the production end has gone down by about a third thanks to the government's efforts in Alberta. Is there any other industry in Alberta that's reduced its carbon footprint the way the oil and gas industry has? Absolutely not. The way the government of Alberta has? Absolutely not. This is where this country has actually seen greenhouse gas emissions reductions, is in the province of Alberta. And our additions to the Canadian economy and our efforts to make sure that our production is the cleanest in the world by the measurement standards we have. So please take a good look at that before you start or continue to just repeat your government's nonsense lines and understand where we're actually making headway on reducing emissions in Canada's economy. In a carbon tax, as many people will chirp on social media or other media, a carbon tax, the purity of a carbon tax was introduced by a guy named William Nordhaus, who was both an economist and a climate scientist. And he looked at the time, and I'll bring this to the committee's attention too, and if anybody's watching, he brought the whole notion of what a cost of a carbon tax should be and could be. And he initially came out with a number about between $26, and he revised that later to about $38 US. And the issue is, of course, if you had a one mechanism in society that would address the effects of carbon, so we're not abusing a public good, because the air is a public good, the atmosphere, the climate is a public good, and it's not to be changed for free. So it is a way of actually addressing it. But Mr. Nordhaus's approach to it was, what is the one thing you can do? So if you had a pure carbon tax, it would be the number he came up with, $20 to $38 US per ton. $80, of course, is much higher than that. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency at the time had around $50, they thought. So there's not one thought on this, but that is in the absence of all the other ridiculous measures that this government has brought into play on the file, which include, another industrial carbon tax, the clean energy regulations, the clean fuel standards, the regulations that cost, as with the batteries, $800 per ton of emissions reductions. These are ridiculous measures on top of any purity associated with some concept of a carbon tax, which is not represented in the consumer carbon tax that this government has put into play here, which is a complete in-out scheme for Canadian tax dollars money. And it was tabled in the Parliament this week based on a access to information request by one of my colleagues. By 2030, this tax, the consumer carbon tax, that's an instrument of this Liberal NDP coalition, will cost Canadians $9 billion by 2030. $9 billion extra taxes, kind of hiding it behind where you're going to have to make tax increases. Be honest with Canadians. That's all we're asking here. They've found you misleading them about the carbon tax. They continue to try and hold you to account, and you won't give them an election on the matter. I can guarantee you, every meeting I had this summer was, can you please get these people to call an election? It's done. It's over. Any support this government may have had has been washed away with your dishonesty. People recognize it now very clearly. You're no longer obfuscating. You're no longer kind of the cloudy middle. It's a gray area whether you're telling the truth or not. You're not. You've misled Canadians. They recognize it. Now get on with it and face the music, because the music has to be faced here. There is no other outcome. We are going to have an election. People are going to remember exactly what you said on this matter and how you misled them and how much this is going to cost them. The end outcome here, of course, we're here. We're democratically elected. And I had a podcast yesterday, and we talked about the whittling away of democracy that's happened here. And I'm going to challenge my colleagues, particularly on the government side of the bench, the Liberal NDP coalition. If you're going to support a carbon tax and you're going to say we're going to continue not to face the public on what it has to say about a carbon tax, then you need to recognize you've got to get better informed about it, because democracy requires people in your positions to actually understand what you are doing. We're becoming more and more a government of siloed expertise, and anybody that tells me that somebody's an expert in lost Canadians, well, okay, an expert in lost Canadians, but connect the dots. Lost Canadians don't exist in silos. Lost Canadians are something where we've got to make sure that we're doing some significant good here at the end of the day. So anybody that thinks they're experts, bring that expertise to a mix of everything we need to accomplish here in society and ensure we get the right things done for this country. Because I can tell you right now, there's a country here that's being wasted, a country whose productivity has gone down significantly. Our country underperforms the world now as far as our economic growth goes. If it wasn't for the excess immigration that's happened over the last 2 years, our GDP, gross domestic product, would be negative. What does that tell you? The economy's shrinking, except for the new people coming into the economy that we've got to make sure we continue to produce for. That's not a recipe for success. Our productivity has to get better in this country. We have to start producing more per capita. None of this government's policies have led to any of those outcomes, and it's a shame. It's an absolute shame, because I would love to see more people on the government side of the bench that actually understand the economics of what they're trying to do and how it affects everybody in their country, because it is a whittling down of what they can buy with their after-tax dollars. So let's take a look at that, after-tax dollars. With the increases in taxes, my apologies, with the increases in taxes brought on by this government, people have less take-home pay. Less take-home pay, in addition, buys less because of the inflated dollars that this government has run through as a result of their money printing operations. Inflation has caused everything to go up in society, and less ability to buy everything Canadians need: food, shelter, clothing, the goods. We get less out of our dollars we spend. Number one, we take home, our take-home paychecks are whittled away by government taxes, and then the take-home pay gets stretched because it doesn't buy as much as it used to buy. But we're Canada's a democracy still, despite the whittling away of it that happens, including in the bills that these members across the way bring to the House of Commons. Be accountable, okay? On your carbon tax, show up. Go talk to your, the number one judgment you're going to get, if you're so solid about this is a good thing to move forward with, then let's have a carbon tax election. If you don't think you've misled Canadians, then show up at their doors and tell them, we only misled you for your own good, and they won't believe you. Well, and I've had many conversations on the sidelines with my Liberal colleagues, with my NDP colleagues, with my Bloc colleagues, and I want to tell them, if you don't think the by-elections in two safe Liberal ridings in June and September were a very clear indication that the Liberals don't have the support of the people anymore, then you're tone deaf. You're not paying attention. Your eye is off the ball. Admit to Canadians that you want to continue to dither and whittle away at their savings, whittle away at the country's productivity, whittle away at the democracy that we've hard fought for and won here in Canada, whittle away at everything Canadians stand for in order to continue this facade of what you're actually trying to do. But what you're doing is ruining Canadians' lives, ruining the economy, ruining the take-home pay, making everything worse in this country. Now I'm asking you to think about it and get to the point where we actually get better outcomes, a better Canada for all our citizens. I think the last thing I want to say, Mr. Chair, if I may, is, and I'd like my colleagues, particularly my colleagues in the Liberal Party of Canada, because I know you're just, most of you are backbenchers, and some of you are people I've worked with well in other committees, and Ms. O'Connell, it's the first time I've been on committee with you, so welcome. But please, please, go to your leadership and do a quick examination yourselves. You're people that were elected by your constituents. Do you think your constituents are going to be pleased when they look at how much money's been taken out of their pockets through various means, including this carbon tax, and given to a bunch of your boss's friends? Because that is overwhelmingly obnoxious. The amount of money, and pardon me, I've got a finance career before I came here, and one thing we do in finance is we follow the money. And the money that's been taken, I'd like to say stolen, but it's not stolen, taken from the pockets of Canadians, despite the fact that they've been misled about it, has landed in the pockets of several friends of your leadership. So take a look at all the organizations that are getting greased on the wheels of this dishonesty, and do your constituents a favor and say, I don't stand up for that. That would be a challenge I put to you. That would be a challenge I put to my NDP colleague who protested that NDP only supported that bill 15 years ago because, you know, we were told to. Well, okay, thanks very much. Step up, hold your head up, go to your constituents and say, this is what I found out, and this is why I'm actually calling for an election as well. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. And we have 3 speakers on the list. We have Mr. Radikov, Mr. Comich, and Mr. Alkhoury. So I will go to Mr. Radikov. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's great to be here talking about this issue again on the carbon tax. I want to start with the comments that Madame Zahid said. I agree with her that there are a lot of trolls on social media. There are a lot of nasty comments. There are horrible un-Canadian things that are said by many people online on social media these days, and it's sad that it's come to that in our country. And as my colleague Tom Comich said, Conservatives are not immune to this either. I mean, it's not I don't want to get into an argument of who gets it worse than who, but you know, as politicians, I think all of us have experienced this, and it's something unfortunately we can't control, or we haven't yet figured out how to control. But from my perspective, I've always been very fair with what I've said, and I will continue to be that way and communicate in that way. I also want to just very briefly, because Madam Kwan spoke about the way that this bill has gone through. And I just wanted to remind everybody, because sometimes we forget, so much time passes, we forget the original orientation of things. And this whole Lost Canadians cause started with a Conservative bill from the Senate, S-245. And if we recall back, the whole point was to make it very, very simple, because this has been tried many times to be fixed over the years, and it's always failed. It's always gotten mired down in complications, which is exactly where we find ourselves today. And I just want to remind everybody that the whole intent was to make a very simple bill to fix a very specific problem of Lost Canadians. The Senate actually pushed it through in one day, all the readings in one day to get it here. The intention was to bring it to the committee. Everybody's previously agreed to this, get it into law. And it could have been in law for at least a year at this point. And yet, because the government chose to hijack that bill and add a whole bunch of other complexity to it, that caused all of this problem that we find here today. And so I just wanted to remind people that it was always our intention as Conservatives to fix this mistake, this problem with lost Canadians, and fix it quickly. And that was our intention. But yet, because of the government's interference in the bill and trying to complicate things and trying to solve 18 problems at one time, here we are. And there's a very good chance this won't get solved in this Parliament, which is a shame. Now, I want to talk just a little bit more about the carbon tax. You know, it's been mentioned a few times today, but I have a bit of a different angle on this. So back in the fall, when the NDP Liberal government chose to remove the carbon tax on home heating for those voters in Atlantic Canada, and it's, of course, been pointed out that this was a political decision that was made to protect votes, supposedly protect votes in Atlantic Canada, which, of course, hasn't happened. There was an outcry, and I have a quote I want to read, and it comes from Saskatchewan. Let me read it here. It says, "This exemption is a clear recognition that Canadians are struggling with crushing inflation and higher costs, but it has specifically left out relief for the people of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta. Instead of picking and choosing who gets relief based on Prime Minister Trudeau's election map, we're calling on the federal government to extend relief to all Canadian families." End of quote. Now, who does that sound like? Who do you think said that? I think most people would guess that sounds like the Premier of Saskatchewan, Scott Moe. But in reality, these are the words of the NDP leader in Saskatchewan, if you can believe it. The NDP leader said those words, which are essentially the same as what Premier Scott Moe said and what most Western Canadians have that belief. It was shocking. The NDP have completely reversed their position. The people on the ground have reversed that position. There's a second quote from the NDP leader, Carl Lebec, that says, it was in the Leader Post recently, the Regina Leader Post, and the article says, "Standing beside one of Regina's business thoroughfares, Saskatchewan NDP leader Carl Lebec denounced federal policies that have failed this province, especially the carbon tax. The carbon tax has got to go. Saskatchewan people can't afford it," Beck said. And of course, most living here would agree. And I just find it kind of humorous that at a provincial level, everybody, all politicians are running as fast as they can away from the carbon tax. And even I think at the federal level now, finally, the NDP are starting to, because of the extreme pressure and the obvious math of the next election, we're seeing them start to change it. But, and I also want to point out that when our province in Saskatchewan decided to stop collecting carbon tax on home heating, as was done in Atlantic Canada, for myself personally, the bill that I have went down by $20 a month instantaneously. And that's not an insignificant amount to Saskatchewan people. You know, that's about $240 a year for me, and I think that's about the typical average that can be expected. That's a significant amount of money, and that's just one little piece of it on the carbon tax. So that's pretty significant. So I think it's interesting, I guess, how things have evolved and how important it is for the government to wake up and see what people are saying, listen to what people are saying, understand that very large amounts of people in this country, and not just in Western Canada, but right across the country, very much dislike this carbon tax. And yet, the government continues to be adamant that they not only want to continue with the carbon tax, but continue increasing it every year, quadrupling it yet from where it is. And so I think that's why this motion, this amendment to the motion is important, that we allow Canadians to have their say and that we have a carbon tax election so that Canadians can speak up, tell government what they want, and then we can move forward from there. Now, Mr. Chair, we have spoken about this quite a lot, and I would like to make a motion that we adjourn this meeting.
There is a motion on the floor to adjourn the meeting. I'm going to ask for, is there a unanimous consent? No? No unanimous consent, so we could go to the vote. Then I will ask Mr. Clerk to call the vote.
Okay, Mr. Ali, since we did not make your sound check, can you say yeas or nays quickly, and hopefully the interpreters can be careful with their microphone?
No.
No. Yes.
It's no, not against.
Against the motion to adjourn? Okay. Mr. Chang?
No.
Monsieur El Khoury?
No.
Ms. O'Connell?
No.
Ms. Zaid?
No.
Mr. Kimmich?
Yes.
Mr. McGuire?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Ridicup?
Yes.
Monsieur Brunel-Duceppe?
Oui.
Ms. Kwan?
No.
So the motion is defeated. I will go to 1 o'clock to suspend the meeting unless I have a unanimous consent to suspend the meeting now. Do I have a unanimous consent to suspend the meeting now? No?
Sir,
No?
no.
Okay, so we'll go to 1 o'clock. So I will give the floor to Mr. Kimmich. Mr. Kimmich, please go ahead, and then Mr. El Khoury, you are in the line. And so at 1 o'clock, I would love to call it a suspension then, because we were not successful, unless you want to bring this motion again.
Maybe after a few minutes of hearing me
Okay.
again, people will reconsider their choices.
Sure. Okay, your call.
It's
Mr.
totally
Kimmich,
fine,
I
Speaker.
leave it to the members to make the decision.
I respect the members' choices, so that's entirely up to them.
Mr. McGuire, you put you on the list? Please. Good, thank you.
May I continue, Chair?
Please go ahead.
So I guess you were given a chance to not let me speak, and I voted to not let myself speak, which is unusual. It's probably the first time in 9 years I voted to not let myself speak at committee. It's like I'm at Proc all over again in my first term. I wanted to address a few of the things I heard from the other side, because I think it's material to everything that we've been talking about on this sub-amendment, how we got here, why this particular, the legislation that the main motion is referring to. Mr. El Khoury talked about the drops in the interest rates by the Bank of Canada, and then sort of implied, oh, not implied, almost said it, that it's going to keep going down. And I was wondering, is the Liberal government going to force the Bank of Canada governor to lower interest rates? That would be most unusual, because I thought those interest rate decisions are entirely independent of government. And if monetary policy is no longer independent, I think he should put it on the record that it's no longer independent. The $10 a daycare programs, I remember, the Conservative side voted for C35, which these agreements are attached to, and it's a disaster in my home province, where there are many daycare, especially private daycares, who are going out of business. A lot of home care, especially in my riding. There's a few of my communities where I have a lot of home care that provide day homes. That's how I grew up when I was growing up in Brossard on the South Shore of Montreal. I grew up in these day homes, basically. They're critical. They're being put out of business by the Liberal government agreement that was forced on my province. And you'll see a lot of criticism available from our Alberta minister at the time, before she was promoted to the Environment Ministry, on this particular issue. And about the school food program that Mr. El Khoury loves to promote, it's fed exactly 0 children, as far as I know. Zero fed. I'm pretty sure there's letterhead. There's probably some nice writing out there with a beautiful font going around. No children fed. 0. There's a lot of private, not-for-profit organizations that have fed more children than the Liberal government. Sure. I'll give you an example. Brown Bagging for Kids in Calgary has fed more children, probably in 1 week, than the entire government of Canada has in the past 9 years. If anything, the government that you keep supporting on the other side has probably taken food out of more children's mouths by making it so expensive than has actually fed. Mm-hmm. So that this food program is just a total sham. It's a total sham. You should not promote it. There are other things you could talk about that maybe you could convince the public on. And judging from the polls, the public doesn't trust you, doesn't trust the cabinet, and really doesn't trust the prime minister. Mm-hmm. I've not even met Liberals at the doors who would be willing to say, I trust the Prime Minister of Canada. I've not found. I found Liberals at the doors who say, you know, I want to continue voting Liberal. Not I'm going to. I want to continue. I want to find a reason to vote Liberal. And I think they're ready for that carbon tax election that my sub-amendment is calling for. I think they recognize that this has to be done. There's a few more things that were mentioned about C-37, the originating piece of legislation that introduced the first-generation limit, that the Superior Court, that the judge, the Schifano, was charter non-compliant. If you read the actual judicial decision in the paragraph 260 range, specifically the charter non-compliance is connected to the incompetence of the IRCC minister. The Minister of Immigration's department is incompetent. He's incompetent. He can't seem to get a handle on his file. Some people are just not meant for this. They're on their fifth immigration minister. Maybe it's time for a seventh. I'm not sure how many it'll take to fix this. C-37 was unanimously voted on, not once, where perhaps the argument made by the NDP would make sense, but twice. And it wasn't that it was just unanimously agreed to, unanimous without dissent. And typically in this place, I'm going to reveal maybe some inside baseball things for the public. Typically in this place, because I have been the deputy House leader on the Conservative side, House leaders talk to each other. The deputies talk to each other. We all know the positions of our caucuses. Like I'm not sure how the other caucuses work, but our caucus, we run our House leadership. We tell them what to do. That we have votes, and they are directed on certain matters on what to do. And that's the way it works. So on C-37 at the time, my understanding would have been that if everybody unanimously supported it, you unanimously supported everything within C-37, including the first generation limit. C-37 also restored citizenship to a lot of Canadians. It was fixing some of the errors in the 1977 Citizenship Act. And I think that is really important to mention. To make the claim that a third party who wasn't a member of parliament, who wrote a book, who makes a claim that is not backed because that person has not talked to Stephen Harper, as far as I know, has not talked to parliamentarians of the time, has not talked to the House leadership of the time or staffers at the time, make a claim is just that. It's a claim, hearsay. Somebody said something. So I would not take that to the bank. It's also, I think, a false interpretation of what was said at the Hansard. I don't have that particular page with me. It's upstairs in my desk. I look forward to debate continuing on C-71 in the chamber, and I'm going to be there every single time it comes up. And I'm going to participate. I'm going to keep asking the same question I asked the minister on the first day. How many people would be affected by C-71? I know how many people would be affected by my sub-amendment right now. It'll be 40+ million Canadians are going to get to go to the polls and pass judgment on all of us, including the Conservatives. They're going to pass judgment on our performance, and I'm looking forward to it. I have zero fear for my constituents and the residents in my riding. I am more than willing to submit myself to their wisdom, and if they choose to vote me out, they can do so. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to earn their support. I'm pretty sure. I got a gut feeling they're pretty satisfied with my work based on my door knocking and my riding in other parts of the country. I have a good feeling about it this time. Well, I see even the vice chair says he'd vote for me. So I just want to make sure of that as we continue to talk about this sub-amendment that I've put forward. I also want to talk about the delays in C-71 and now this sudden rush that I see from at least one opposition party and the government side now because there is a court-imposed deadline. There was a court-imposed deadline in June, and the government never bothered to put up C-71 for debate. Did not even bother. It was on notice as of May 23rd. So at any time afterwards, it could have been put up for debate. There was like almost 20 days worth of debate that you could have put up the bill for. Why didn't you tell your House leadership to do it? Like I don't understand. There was a court-imposed deadline then as well, and your side chose not to do it. So it is interesting that after the summer you come back, and now you claim this must be rushed because there's a court-imposed deadline for December. I'll also remind you, the court's decision in Bjornquist from the judge was December of 2023. Why did it take 156 calendar days for you to table a piece of legislation called C-71? It's not even that long. Like, open question. Anyone can answer it. Go back to the minister and answer. 156 days for legislation where there's multiple breaks in between, and then not a single day worth of debate. But today we're being told that this committee must approve a partisan, aggressive, anti-conservative motion with a whole bunch of hearsay in the preamble to rush the bill through the House. then your own members then complain, and one opposition party complains that we, conservatives, and others too, because you all participated in it, spent 30 hours debating different amendments, hearing from government officials. That was invaluable. So you want us to take it to committee, but then you will complain that we have to rush it through committee because we conservatives will take too much time? Like, this is like a, go back to your comms people, that's a bad talking point. Your policy people should be writing your talking points. I am, as a former policy guy, I fervently believe this. Let the policy people write the points, not the comms people. With all the blessings to them, because I know we have them on all sides. They exist everywhere, I'm sorry to say. But policy people should be the ones writing these points. It just makes no sense. I understand the Citizenship Act now better, I think, than any other piece of legislation before the House. Like, I'm comfortable now when I read C-71 after what happened with S-245, and we moved many amendments. And you also all know this. Over 10 of them were Liberal amendments that the Conservative side voted for. Yeah. We proposed over 40 amendments, some of them very substantial amendments. So that was not a filibuster. It wasn't a waste of time. It was productive. We were doing actual work. I also made promises during that meeting, because that's on the public record, and I intend to keep those promises. If you play games, then we will be here debating sub-amendments, amendments, and main motions like this from here until the end of this session. Because the public is tired of the government side especially. You're in government. You're supposed to govern. So if you want to persuade us, persuade my House leadership, persuade Conservative members of Parliament that you are right. But so far I haven't seen that. What I've seen instead is attempts to circumvent the process. When S-245 was before here, I said we could expedite that piece of legislation if we stuck to Section 8 Lost Canadians, which we all agree with. Like, it's even in this legislation, but we Conservatives agree with it. It was a Conservative idea from Yonah Martin. I will also add the fact that during the minister's speech, when he was speaking in French, he referred to le sénateur Martin. It's la sénatrice Martin. Quand tu sais même pas que le parrain.
So the sponsor of this bill in the Senate is a senator from BC, but it's really ridiculous when they don't know what S-245 is and why this was brought forward and what the original of the bill S-230 was and why it was passed through the Senate so quickly the last time. They don't know all that.
Serious attempt. If you want to work together, we can. I'm more than happy to. But I have members on my side who have serious concerns on C-71. They also have concerns that, like in my riding, that we will not have this carbon tax election like my sub-amendment is calling for. And I find it interesting, too, that, I heard members, particular members, saying that Conservatives are doing this at all committees. I literally wrote that sub-amendment on my notepad in what I call affectionately, my chicken scratch. I can sort of read it, and then I wrote out the French version right afterwards. There's no games here. I don't go to my House leadership to ask for permission. They know that. They're as frustrated with me as you are. If you want to work on this collaboratively, then I invite you to move on from the political games. If you have more of these types of aggressive partisan motions, then we're going to have more of these types of days where we're debating what I hear at the doors in my riding when I go to the door, that people are fed up with the government and would like to see an election. They want to have their say, and their say is a carbon tax election. That's what they're saying to me. That's one of the main, I'd say, primary issue. Probably now it's over 50% of the people at the doors who I connect with. This is their driving issues connected to cost of living, and they want to see this. We're going to have a non-confidence vote next week. On Wednesday, probably, hopefully, one of many to come and repeated. Ours will be simple. It's 12 words. I think we all agree on 12 words as we go forward on it. But the carbon tax election will come if this committee were to accept my sub-amendment. That might actually expedite it even faster. It would actually be great to see it happen even more quickly if we need to use the committee process to move non-confidence in the government in order to submit ourselves as public servants to the people's judgment. because they have a right to judge the quality of our work. And you don't get votes, you earn votes, and you earn them repeatedly. And it is difficult because it's your work, it's your political party's work, it's your political movements. There are provincial parties as well. You have political leadership as well that you have to defend when you want to. You don't have to defend them. I mean that, especially on the other side, you don't have to defend your political leadership. At a certain point, self-preservation should kick in, and you should be listening to the people in your ridings. On Bjornquist specifically, on this court ruling that is the linchpin of why now we have C-71 and this claim that we need to rush. The government can always return to the court and ask for another delay if it comes to that. I don't think it'll come to that. The government side has a working majority effectively.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président, point d'ordre.
Point of order, Chair. I just want to say, first off, I have respect for my colleague. I don't want to interrupt him. But I think we thought we were going to suspend at 1, and it is 1, just because that's the discussion we had.
What to do?
I will tell you what the speaking list is, and then I will take a decision. The speaking list right now, Mr. Committee still have the floor, and if we suspend, he will have the floor next time. And then Mr. El-Khoury, Mr. McLean, Mr. McGuire, and Mr. Reddycop. Taking that into consideration, there is quite a few speakers. I think it's in the best interest of all members and the sports staff that we suspend it at now. So I will suspend the meeting now.